Tonight, I've got some interesting stuff to read to you. I'm going to read to you. I'm going to read you a bedtime story. So put on your jammies, get all comfy, get your little cup of whatever it is that you like to sip on, and Uncle Billy's going to read you a bedtime story. Long-time listeners to this broadcast already know the subject, I'm sure. People ask me, ladies and gentlemen, why it is that I play this type of music when I get ready to discuss certain subjects on the hour of the time. It's because it evokes an air of mystery. It makes you sort of go into a thoughtful mood. And the music is mysterious. It makes you wonder about its origins, what it's all about. The same is true for what you're going to hear. This is from the Rosicrucian Digest. The Rosicrucian Digest. I'm going to read to you from issue number 2, volume 74, 1996, for those of you who may have a copy and may wish to look it up. And I think you're going to find this very interesting. You see, everywhere I look for the answers to the real meaning behind the veil, to what's really going on in the so-called fraternal orders, the mystery schools, the secret societies, I always come up with the same answer. Always. And it took me years and years and years to be able to understand the symbolic language wherein they hide their esoteric, which means hidden, religion. And religion it is, ladies and gentlemen. Make no mistake about it. And don't ever believe that you can sit down and honestly ask them questions about these things and really believe that they're going to give you honest answers. They cannot. They have taken blood oaths upon pain of death never to reveal the secrets of the lodge. And so they cannot, and they will not. And the tenets of the lodge teach them that when it comes to a choice between telling the truth and telling a lie, they will tell a lie in every single instance without fail. In fact, they are chronic liars. Now, I don't care if it's your father, I don't care if it's your mother, and I don't care how much you love them. You may think they would never betray you and never lie to you. I'm telling you right now, you're mistaken. You are mistaken. This is called the quest for the Holy Grail, the Grail Guardians, by Earl DeMott. Earl DeMott, Master of Education, and FRC. FRC stands for Fraternitas Rosicruciae, which means that he is a member of the Order of Rosicruciae. Listen to this very carefully, ladies and gentlemen. I think that if you pay attention, if you're listening closely, and especially for those of you who've been following what I've been teaching you throughout the years of this broadcast, you're going to find it extremely interesting, maybe even revelatory, and certainly confirmative. In the Grail romances of the 12th and 13th centuries, the Grail has been associated with a family who were its guardians, and a special temple or castle where the Grail was kept and protected by the Grail King and its guardians. Now, I want to acquaint you with some remembrances for those of you who may have run across this word guardian before. If you've ever been to the Luxor Hotel, there's one wall. It's not easy to find or easy to see. If you've been on the boat ride, on the Egyptian barges, then you may have seen it. A portrait on a wall of the Guardian. The Guardian. In the UFO myths, a couple of years ago, someone surfaced called the Guardian and pretended to be feeding information to Art Bell and some of these other Looney Tune whacked out deception artists, called the Guardian. He also sent out a videotape of a purported extraterrestrial spaceship landing, which of course was fake, was false, was a hoax. It was called the Guardian. And you see this Guardian pop up every once in a while in strange places doing strange things, usually leading people astray with misinformation, disinformation, and just outright bold-faced lies. Well, listen carefully as we continue here. Whenever something important needs to be elaborated upon, I will attempt to do that for you. I know that many of you are novices in your quest for the truth. The idea was given vogue with the appearances of Robert de Boron's Joseph of Arimathea and the account entitled Quest del Saint Grail, written anonymously. Both appeared within the last decades of the 12th century. Robert de Boron related that after the crucifixion, Joseph, the rich merchant who served Christ so devotedly and who collected the blood of Christ in the cup of the Last Supper, went on to establish a line of Grail kings. They were expected to keep the secrets of the Grail, in this case the chalice, and pass it down to their successors. They were Grail kings by right of moral worthiness. In these and other Grail stories in the context of Arthurian lore, the successors to the Grail king, that is, Percival and Galahad, passed the initiation tests of Round Table Fellowship. Though all of Arthur's knights could be described as knights who sought the Grail, The literature places these two in the Grail King category. They were Knights of the Grail. Now, in all of these orders and mystery schools and secret societies, you will always find reference to that which was lost and is being sought. In the Freemasonic order, it's the lost word of Freemasonry. In the ancient Egyptian mysteries, it was the lost phallus of Osiris. In the Arthurian lore, it's the lost Grail for which they search. At the beginning of the 13th century, Wolfram von Eschenbach elaborated further on the importance of the Grail guardians in his account of Parzival. He talks of Grail Knights who were bred to the pure life and who had the special task of keeping the Grail. They were summoned to serve the Grail after they had passed a test of worthiness. Wolfram seemed to be suggesting that the hand of God, acting through the power of the Grail or some other mysterious criteria, played some part in the recruitment. This, in turn, could imply that the Grail Knights were a closed, secret society in which tests, ritual preparation, and initiatory rites were involved in the process of selection. Of course, it always is. The Grail myth took shape in the time of the Crusades, when two religious faiths found themselves locked in holy war in Palestine for about 200 years. The Templars, or Knights of the Temple, who played a leading part in the Crusades, seemed to manifestly play this role as Grail guardians, as implied or stated in the accounts of three writers on the Grail myth. The anonymous author of the Perlusvaus and Wolfram, in his Parzival, were chiefly responsible for identifying the Grail Knights with the Order of the Temple. Founded in AD 1118, the order started from a group of 9 men who took the sword to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land. It grew in size and influence over the next 2 centuries, acquiring fame for exceptional courage and fighting skill, and for high moral conduct, or at least that is the perception. That the Templars also amassed great wealth through bequests of property, military success, and by acting as bankers, traders, and security agents in most of Europe and the Mediterranean is also part of history. In fact, the Knights Templars were the first international bankers. Mention has also been made of their influence in the building of the great cathedrals of Europe. Peter Bryce notes, "The Templars had the aim of guarding the routes to the Holy Land, which can be taken literally, but also in a more profound sense. Their activities put them into contact with other civilizations. They seem to have formed an intellectual link between East and West, and to have become guardians of a great deal of esoteric knowledge." And right there, I've got to pause and take a drink of water. You all know why. That's much better. Now, the author of the Perlusvaus betrayed, by the content of his story of Percival, that he belonged to an order of soldier monks. How many of you have heard Lieutenant Colonel James Bo Greitz refer to himself as a soldier monk? Remember what I told you about that man? If you understand the language, you can out the members pretty quickly. This in itself would not be sufficient as an explanation for the author's anonymity, since the Church approved of militant orders to defend the faith. But the writer went on to mention the presence of a conclave of initiates in the Grail Castle who were familiar with the Grail, and Percival's meeting with masters who could summon 33 other knights by clapping their hands. Now, those of you who have been listening to me teach you the secrets of the Lodge for years should have recognized some pretty important symbols there. So let's go back and talk about that. First is the presence or the belonging to an order of soldier monks. And then militant orders to defend the faith. The presence of a conclave of initiates in the Grail castle who were familiar with the Grail, and Parsifal's meeting with masters who could summon 33 other knights simply by clapping their hands. The knights that appeared had Templar insignia and seemed of an age. The mysterious or magical connotations implied here would not sit well with any kind of orthodoxy. Such references, however, and the writer's detailed knowledge of close combat and its effects on the human body clearly pointed to Templars as the Grail Knights. Wolfram was much less reticent to reveal he had some connection with the Templar Order. You see, he was either a Teutonic Knight or Templar, and probably followed the Crusader track to the east. In his poem, he talks about the Grail being guarded by knights who are the purest, who seek adventure as a test of their worthiness, and who were also sent to be rulers of countries. That's a key piece of information. Who were also sent to be rulers of countries. If purity involved monthly asceticism, sacrifice of possessions, a willingness to die for a noble cause, and indomitable courage in the face of overwhelming odds, these attitudes found no better expression than in a Templar knight. Wolfram actually coined a word for his Grail Knights. They were Templison, or Templison is the correct word, Templison, the Iron Men of the Temple. He also described the Grail King whom they served as one who rules over an invisible or spiritual kingdom and Lord of invisible brotherhood. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, has Hermetic undertones. Grail Knights, Templars, were the physical embodiment of their archetype in heaven, according to their beliefs. That he meant to equate the Templars with the Grail Knights is confirmed in one of his later poems, The Young... Oh boy. It's not that I can't pronounce it, it's that this copy is bad and the letters are blurred. I believe it's The Young Titurel, Titurel. The Young Titurel. The Grail castle here resembled a Templar fortress and even had a circular chapel, the way the Templars used to build them. He went on to say that the castle was guarded by Templar knights. Such feelings about the Templars were shared also by other Grail writers. In the Quest del Saint Grail, the sanctum or model of the home of the Grail resembled a model of the Holy Sepulchre to be found in Templar commanderies everywhere, where the most sacred rites were performed. And Templar knights guarding a magnificent temple of the Grail is mentioned by Albrecht von Scharfenberg in his The Younger Titurel, AD 1270. Now, some would argue that the Templar Brotherhood and the Guardians of the Grail were actually one brotherhood, not necessarily protecting a chalice or some other magical object. They could have been guarding something intangible, some secret, some treasure, or some special knowledge as a source of power from which derived their moral strength and which made them super knights at that time, capable of transcending national and human boundaries. One of the implicits of the Joseph of Arimathea legend is that Jesus may have passed on some secret or secrets to Joseph when the latter served his time in prison and Jesus visited him. This secret was to be passed on to the Grail keepers who succeeded him. If the Grail guardians were conceptualized as a spiritual host, and if they were manifesting in some physical form on earth at a time when the Grail legend enjoyed high popularity, then the Templars would be this visible example of service to the Grail. Once again, we must take a drink of water. The intimate connection of the whole Grail myth with Templarism was zealously promoted in the first half of the 19th century. Intriguing articles appeared before the public which sustained the idea that certain baptismal fonts and vessels were like Grail vessels, that the Grail poems were written to glorify the Templar order, that Templar symbols and doctrines were borrowed from the Grail legend, that the same ideal of union of knighthood and sanctity was found in the Templar order and the Grail guardians, and so on. It is even possible to envisage that the Templar order, among others like the Teutonic Knights and the Hospitallers, was the manifest model upon whom the ideal conception of the Grail guardian was built up by the Grail storytellers. Now, this becomes especially significant if we place the Templars within the spiritual lineage of the secret initiatory tradition of the mystery schools. And ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly where you had better place them. The Templars held their meetings in private. They initiated their recruits within their chapels in secrecy and defied external attempts by courts of the time and by posterity to discover the secrets in their worship. Common elements in thought and practice of certain initiatic schools, which, due to their persistence over time and their value in raising the consciousness of humanity, at least that's what they claim, have come to be recognized as representing that movement called the Great Tradition. Its teachings were religious or mystical, usually not subject to the dogma of any particular faith. The Rosicrucian order finds its roots in the mystery tradition of ancient Egypt. The inspiration and contents of this tradition have been reinforced through additions from the mystery teachings of individuals and groups in ancient Greece, China, India, Persia, and many other lands, not forgetting the contributions of modern science, philosophy, and psychology, and its own research which confirm or clarify the ancient wisdom of this tradition. Historical links can be traced between the Rosicrucian order, AMORC, and Rosicrucian activity in the late Middle Ages. That is, in the time of the Crusades, Templars, alchemists, Cathars, provincial Kabbalists, and Grail literature. The area of the most intense activity for all these groups was the south of France, although the movements were widespread throughout Europe. It is reasonable to assume that some Templars were Rosicrucians and vice versa, and the same could be said of Templars and Cathars and Rosicrucians, that some Templars fought in the Albigensian Crusade against Cathars does not negate the cross-links between the movements. These Templars felt their first loyalty was to papal authority, from whom they received their authority to function. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the myths of the Templar order. In fact, the Knights Templar existed for many years. For many years, ladies and gentlemen. They were commissioned by Geoffrey de Bouillon, who was the first king of Jerusalem. What do you think about that? Not by the Pope. And they rose to power on that commission. It wasn't until they were extremely powerful and very successful in the field of battle, and very rich, I might add, that they were summoned by the Pope and then commissioned as an order of the Catholic Church. I think the Knights Templar accepted more on a political basis than on any basis of understanding and belief in the Catholic religion. Because it is clear, ladies and gentlemen, in researching the Knights Templar, that they certainly were not, ladies and gentlemen, practicers of the Christian religion as interpreted by the Catholic Church or any other Christian church, for that matter. They were, in fact, practitioners of the ancient mystery religions. On the Templar-Rosicrucian connection, not long after the suppression of the Templars as an order, some Templars who survived or escaped the persecution formed a society called the Elder Brothers of the Rose Cross. Templar Grand Masters and advanced members of the order would be categorized as higher initiates. They were distinct from other servants of the order, like builders, artisans, men-at-arms, and ancillaries. The elevated station of their leaders had parallels with the Cathars, whose leaders were perfecti, perfect because of moral purity and strictly bound rule. Others were credentes, believers, who were allowed some freedom from higher discipline and who were not yet ready to be elevated. Both Templars and Cathars derived some of their beliefs from contact with the Middle Eastern religious and mystical thought, which played no small part in their final condemnation as heretics and in the control of their overt activity. Differences existed among the mystically minded societies. These are best seen in the main symbols representing their principal aim or character. The Templar Red Cross on a white mantle had a related but different symbolic meaning from the Rosy Cross. A Cathar cross was equal branched with a rose at the axis. Rosicrucians as a group have never been known to go on military adventures, although individuals may have been combatants. Cathars defended themselves when attacked. The Templars' fame was partly based on their being a fighting machine. It also happened that Templar loyalty to papal authority saw some of them, perhaps unwillingly, take part in the Albigensian crusade against the Cathars. Yet all three movements were spiritually linked in that let me read that again so that there's no confusion. Yet all three movements were spiritually linked in that they emphasized personal responsibility for one's own spiritual progress and inspired others by their exemplary conduct. And this is an important theme in the Grail quest. The region of southern France, where Catharism flourished before the final suppression, and particularly the district of Toulouse, enjoyed for a while a freedom of thought and religion. Its people derived countless benefits from the activities of Templars, Cathars, and Rosicrucians. In England, too, there was some cooperation shortly after the Crusades between Templars and Rosicrucians. They built the temple in London, which was to be used as a common ritualistic center. In general, these societies were applying and propagating in their own way their understanding about life and its meaning. They practiced initiatory models for the mystical advancement of their neophytes, and their rites relevant to this were conducted in strict privacy. Since Rosicrucianism is an eclectic, selectively inclusive, and progressive body of wisdom learning, it would have included the best of what the Templars thought and practiced in their private and secret instruction. References to this interesting material is to be found in the archives of the Rosicrucian Order, AMORC, and the affinities between the two orders are considered in the private instruction given to Rosicrucian students. So who were the Grail Guardians? The question is sometimes asked, is the existence of Grail Guardians mythical, or are they historical figures? This leads to the same debate on the nature of the Grail. Is it an object or symbol? There have been attempts to establish a lineage over the centuries, a succession of Grail keepers, an actual rather than a legendary family, a physical bloodline that matched the spiritual one. And for those of you who would like to pursue that, I suggest you read Holy Blood, Holy Grail by Lee Bajant and Lincoln. A path is traced from the time of the Crusades through the Merovingian dynasty to Mary Magdalene and to Jesus. An apparent reference in Wolfram's work to an actual Merovingian ruler of a principality in the south of France is referenced for supporting evidence. With Wolfram's reputation as cryptic writer, the opinion is expressed, and I quote, "The more one studies him, the more likely it seems that he is referring to an actual group of people, not a mythic or fictionalized family," end quote. Bajant, page 317. The evidence is a bit tenuous, and the conclusions either tend to raise a few eyebrows or thrill others with the connections explored. Corroboration by other research is wanting, meaning non-existent, but we must keep an open mind about this as we take up another line of thought on the identity of the Grail Guardians. In this case, the lineage is not genetic or fictional, but mystical. And that's, ladies and gentlemen, where I tell you the path lies. In this view of the Grail King, our guardian, we must turn to the Christian mystery. The name of Melchizedek, referred to in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 3, foreshadows Christ in his offering of bread and wine in token of the flesh and blood of his people. He appears to take on the character of a Grail King, holding both offices of priest and temporal ruler, one who is without father or mother or genealogy and continues a priest forever. Jesus Christ is called a priest in the succession of Melchizedek by right of sacrifice. There is no physical bloodline here, ladies and gentlemen, but an implication that the Grail King could only be a successor to the Melchizedek Christ lineage carried on, as we have seen, by Joseph of Arimathea into the future. The original chalice, or Grail, or its symbolic equivalent and its protectors on earth, were humanity's heritage from the time we acquired a religious or mystical consciousness. Now, this embodiment of the perfect Grail King does not sit well with some conceptions of the Grail romances about the Grail King. In the stories, he appears as the ailing Fisher King, whose incurable wound was caused by some moral lapse. This lapse is explained as sexual indiscretion, or by the implication of original sin, or simply as illustrative of the fall and the need for redemption. Whatever the case may be, both king and kingdom had to suffer indefinitely or until some successor replaced the old king. Recognize that theme? This is a problem we face when myths are mixed, and it occurred in the consciousness of medieval man when pagan beliefs, that is, Celtic, had to come to some accommodation with Christianity. We need not enter into the debate here as to whether the biblical story is so much fact and so much myth. The mythical aspect of the Melchizedek succession supports a linear movement in human origins and destiny from the creation, the fall, experience on earth, and the final perfect outcome on Judgment Day. The Grail King myth, however, represents a cyclic Celtic view of events. What was observable in nature and the universe corresponded with events in the lives of men: birth, growth and decline, death and regeneration, or, if you wish, reincarnation. Once the Melchizedek story and its implications entered into the consciousness of medieval man, it was represented not in the Grail romance, but in stone. One of the countless messages that the Cathedral of Chartres has passed on to posterity is the status of Melchizedek. It stands alongside the biblical and historical figures flanking the portals of the cathedral. He is there. He is there, holding a cup in which there is a smooth stone, as incorporating a double concept. The two symbols of chalice and precious stone, mentioned separately in the romances, were here united as if to permanently set the myth in a medium even more enduring than oral or written tradition. Forever are the two truths represented, the chalice as a source and maintainer of life, and the precious stone as the light of cosmic wisdom. And so we have found in the Melchizedek statue a point of meditation on the nature on man's place in the universe. The Grail guardian here is the perfect man. Remember what I've taught you, ladies and gentlemen? He echoes it right here. And this is a highly degreed adept of the Rosicrucian order. Listen to me very carefully. The Grail guardian here is the perfect man, the priest king, the Christ king, a composite of Arthur and Merlin, a Hermes Trismegistos, one who has attained office by being of two worlds, having one foot in heaven and the other on earth, or living this life in a moment of time as if the two worlds were one. This is surely the concept of the Grail guardians in the imagery of Grail mythology, namely to further the idea of celestial man. I don't know if I'm going to make it for this whole 2 hours, so you guys better be ready to do a lot of talking. In fact, you'll have to excuse me for just a second. I had to turn down the mic pot in order to have a little coughing fit here. Well, this is the last of it, ladies and gentlemen. Every human being must be elevated through trial and initiation to the status of the priest king, the union of the spiritual and temporal, the representation of divinity in the manifested universe in all its glory. The lineage of this elite may be marked out at the ideal or archetypal level, but no one is excluded from attaining this ideal, since it requires individual will and effort in the first place, and then initiation into the highest degree of Grail chivalry. Now, in case you didn't understand what I just told you, it is the realization of the promise of Satan to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, that they were being held prisoner by an unjust, vindictive God in the bonds of ignorance, the chains of ignorance, and that they should eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, even though God had forbidden them to do it, because according to Satan, God was forbidding them their destiny, and that by eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they too would become as gods, and would not, as God told them they would, surely die. Remember that? Well, listen to this again. Listen to this again. Every human being must be elevated through trial and initiation to the status of the priest king, the union of the spiritual and temporal, the representation of divinity in the manifested universe in all its glory. In other words, to become as God. The lineage of this elite may be marked out at the ideal or archetypal level. But no one is excluded from attaining this ideal, since it requires individual will and effort in the first place, and then initiation into the highest degree of Grail chivalry. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, as I have been teaching you for all these years, here is another confirmation from the mouth of a highly degreed member of the Fraternitas Rosicruciae, printed in the Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 74, Issue Number 2, 1996, the admission that their religion is the Luciferian philosophy, exactly as Albert Pike said himself in his book, Morals and Dogma, back in the 1800s, in the middle of the 1800s, when he wrote it. And with that, let us put you in a thoughtful mood to digest what you have just heard. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I have given you confirmation, once again, of the real secret behind the lodge door. Practiced in the temple without windows by the brotherhood. No matter what name you tack onto that brotherhood at the highest levels, it's always the same. Always. Never change. And it never will. It is the concept that because man is the only creature ever given the ability to think or reason that the collective mind of man is in fact the mind of God. And that man, through the use of his intellect and his good works, will become as gods and will not surely die. And they are feverishly working in laboratories to unlock the secret of aging, the genetic code of the human animal, in order that a perfect race of men may be created who will then live forever. How about that? If you don't believe me, if you live long enough, you're going to find out that I'm right.